I always like to say sweet proteins are like the perfect marriage of the best of nature with the best of technology. They come from plants, largely found along the equator, variety of countries, variety of plants, where we think plants evolved to build a trickster protein to more calorically efficiently get an ape or gorilla to eat them by tricking them to think it's like a sugar, it's sweet. It confirms with that sweet taste receptor. But unlike every sugar or sugar alternative that is a small molecule and digests very differently in your body, it digests as a protein.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. This is your host, Michael Wolf. Today's guest is Ali Wing, the CEO of Oobli, a company that makes sweeteners using sweet protein technology. I first tried their product a couple years ago when I tried their proof of concept iced tea that they used to get the word out about their sweet protein technology. And since that time, they have started working with big companies like Ingredion and Mars to help bring their sweeteners to market in a much bigger way. And so we talk about how that is going. We also talk about some of the transitions in the food industry, such as the rise of GLP-1s and other shifts like MAHA. It's a really interesting conversation. I think you will enjoy it. We will have another podcast out tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But for now, stay tuned for my conversation with Ali Wing. I remember really enjoying the Oobli beverages that had your sweet protein in them. And I know that at the time, I think they were kind of a proof of concept. When I look at your website, I think you guys are largely focused nowadays on the chocolate as your proof of concept. But for those who aren't familiar with Oobli, give like the 30-second to minute elevator pitch, what you guys do.
We are first and foremost a sweet protein technology platform, and we really make our money, and our business model is as a specialty ingredient that can be something that replaces sugar, or it changes sweetening systems in packaged food and beverages. We do love our different various, what I think of as our MVPs, are examples of how protein sweetened products can show up. We just had so much popular demand, we decided to keep one of them always live, but we really did our beverages, our baked goods, our chocolates, all as sort of exemplars. I always say it's easier than walking around with a bag of powder to say, have you ever heard of a protein that sweetens, to just give you a product to taste. So I appreciate that you tasted the teas when we had those out. That was our limited time marketing activities in LA when we had the beverages out.
I think it was the peach tea, and the potency of the sweetness was really good. And I always thought on paper, and just generally the resonance of this concept of, hey, sweetness coming from protein versus like sucralose or actual, sugars, that was a much better idea. And so the idea is to use sweet proteins as a sweetener for beverages, for chocolates, etc. For people who don't know what a sweet protein is, explain what that is.
Well, I always like to say sweet proteins are like the perfect marriage of the best of nature with the best of technology. They come from plants, largely found along the equator, variety of countries, variety of plants, where we think plants evolved to build a trickster protein to more calorically efficiently get an ape or gorilla to eat them by tricking them to think it's like a sugar, it's sweet. It confirms with that sweet taste receptor. But unlike every sugar or sugar alternative that is a small molecule and digests very differently in your body, it digests as a protein. But instead of being a protein that's about loading up protein and building muscle, same functionality, you used to use a small amount to trick your taste bud into thinking that it's sweet, but it digests like a protein, which means it's got no glycemic impact and no negative impact on your gut microbiome. So it's really great when we're thinking about, hey, everybody loves sugar. Human nature is to love sugar. We're designed to crave it. But unfortunately, having so much available in our modern food system is at odds with what's healthiest for our bodies. And so proteins can be a way we can kind of build a new base for sweetener systems in packaged food and beverage. That's what we're most excited about.
And I think at the time, if I remember correctly, the name Oobli is derived from a specific sweet protein you guys were using. But when I checked you guys lately, you guys are looking at deriving other sweet proteins. So you've, I guess, increased the number of tools in the toolbox. So if you could kind of dive a little bit into the specific sweet proteins you're using, what you started with Oobli, and then what other ones you're using as well.
Sure. Well, I'd like to say our name was never derived from a protein, but inspired by one of them. And
inspired by one. Okay. Yes.
It's not spelled like it. We loved one of the stories that we heard about. So the unearthing, it's worth sharing because not a lot of people know it. one of the proteins on our platform, but it's one of about a half a dozen, comes from the Oobli fruit. And the Oobli fruit, which is spelled differently than our name, we were inspired by it, had this great old villager story about kids would say when they ate that fruit or berry, "It's so sweet, I forget my mother's milk." And so the forget, Oobli in French, is forgetful. And so that's the name where the fruit name became sort of the colloquial name of it. So we were inspired by that to say, hey, so sweet, you forget your mother's milk, which is the idea behind the Sweet Proteins platform. But we've always been working across the known plant universe of sweet proteins. The most commonly known ones are the Oobli fruit or braising that a lot of people know as a scientific name, or the serendipity berry monolin. Both of those are ones within our toolkit, but we also work with what's called mabolin and curculin and thaumatin, and we're really working across the entire platform. And today there's about a dozen known sweet proteins in the plant kingdom.
And you guys have been positioned somewhat as a tech forward company, a food tech company. So this isn't so easy as just finding an Oobli fruit and just squeezing it to get the sugar out of. Can you explain a little bit of the technology you guys are using to derive your sweet proteins, which then would go into, for example, chocolates, a packaged chocolate?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't think I ever finished the marriage part of the tech part.
Yeah.
We don't grow them. And the reason we don't is even though these cool plants and berries figured out how to grow them, they only make one tiny little protein, and they exist at the top of the canopy in very resource-constrained environments, places where we probably don't need to do more cultivation, right? We're already at a cultivation risk in those environments. But they'd also really only be for the very wealthy because the plants aren't an efficient crop. They have this cool molecular structure that makes this protein, but you wouldn't get at good yields from a growing. So that's where the tech comes in. We're really a fermentation platform. And that is our big unlock. People have known about these plant proteins for 20, 25 years, but haven't had a way to make them a scale accessible solution that could actually be cost effective as a part of sweetener systems. And that's what we do. And we ferment them. We use a very standard sort of commonly used in baking yeast to teach our yeast how to actually grow these things, that what we deliver then is exactly identical to the plant protein.
So while, the past decade, a lot of the focus had been on scaling up new forms of fermentation, like precision fermentation around alternative proteins for plant or plant-based meat replacements. You guys were focused on you found this niche around sweeteners.
We do. And I would say we're really the leaders in it at this point, right? Like we are shipping tons of it. So it's a pretty commercial scale production now. And one of the, I think, better examples of bringing sort of the best of brewing something instead of growing it, but working within the plant world.
Is there a little more competition? Because I know that, for example, Shiru has kind of tried to plant a flag and plant protein-based sweeteners. Are you seeing a little bit more competition in the space?
Well, I won't really speak to what others do, but there's people that say they're evaluating molecular structures of sweet proteins, but that's wholly different than manufacturing it. You don't have a manufacturing source if you're doing AI analysis. Our technology is about being able to produce them, right? So for the most part, we are very, very happy with what we know about the plant universe, and we actually study them a lot. And we use a lot of the same tools that anybody else would be using on an AI platform to understand where to find the sweet proteins. And that's one part of the equation that's important. That's the discovery part. But producing them is the thing that actually nobody's ever done with sweet proteins before. That's what we do.
And so can you talk a little bit about your production differentiation? Do you have a lot of in-house manufacturing? Are you using third parties to scale up the manufacturing?
Yeah, we don't own our own manufacturing. We actually are pretty specific about not wanting to. And the reason for that is that generally speaking, our biotech skills are our most expensive skills. And that's all the science required to teach our yeast how to do this brewing that was otherwise something that grew in nature. And so we use our dollars around our technology. And then we designed a process, which we like to say, I'll borrow the words of our founder, Jason Ryder, who always says, we designed our production capability with the end in mind. Someday, for it to be its most efficient, it should work in all the existing infrastructure in the world today. So we like to think of, we built a process that works in anybody's pots and pans. And the reason for that is long-term, that will be important for it being cost-effective at every volume that will be required to become a real solution in the food system throughout the world. So that means we use contract manufacturers today, but with an anticipation we can work anywhere in the world in anybody's facilities.
It's not unlike, I think, the world of fabless semiconductors, right? Like you basically design the semiconductor, that's what you're saying, and then like you're using someone else's fab to create it.
Our science is really in how we teach our yeast, the strain, how to produce this thing. And some of it's in how we separate it out. We really, it's important to us because the food industry largely is looking for natural solutions that increasingly, whether that's, plant breeding or anything, everyone's being challenged on how to do that more and more efficiently, but we deliver a non-GMO in product nature identical to the plant. And so because of that, there's some downstream technology as well as upstream to make sure what we deliver is exactly what you would have gotten out of the plant.
So are you, for example, legal in Europe? Because so you're non-GMO, because a lot of the precision fermentation we've seen out of like the perfect days of the world are classified as GMO in Europe. You guys are not.
Well, we haven't actually done our regulatory filings in Europe, but I think you're asking a slightly different question. We are a biomanufactured process, right? We teach yeast to do something it hadn't done before. And in that, we share with anybody who's in fermentation, precision fermentation, any of those. The difference is that some people are fermenting an end product that is a new design, a new molecular design ever than existed before in our known universe. And some of us, like us, are actually teaching our yeast how to do something nature already did, but grew it differently, right? So ours are plant identical. Our end product is a non-GMO delivery product with no GMOs in it. But our process is biomanufactured because we are actually teaching our yeast to produce it.
Got it. So it's yet to be seen whether or not it would get approved by the European Union at this point.
No, I don't think there's much question. We will get approved. We meet their standards. They have plenty of biomanufactured plant-based products in their product, or in their market. We obviously haven't filed.
Do they have precision fermented products in Europe?
Oh, for sure. For sure. There's a lot approved in Europe. The difference is where they're looking. So how you label biomanufactured versus a bioengineered product. And I think those get merged a lot. We're a biomanufacturing platform, but we don't have a bioengineered product. Our end product is a non-GMO that's plant identical, right? So it's process versus end product.
You said you guys are shipping a ton of product now. So where, and can you talk to any of the customers that are using your sweeteners?
Well, one of the biggest, of course, announcements we made last year was our partnership with Ingredion, and they're a global manufacturer and distributor of stevia products. And it's a really good example of how we tend to always say, we're the first to admit that sugar is a miracle crop, and there's nothing not to love about sugar. We're all designed to crave it, but actually our bodies are out of whack with how we consume it. And so whether that's sugar or sugar alternatives, we tend to be a partner with all of the food system to really dramatically reduce the amount of small molecule sweeteners, whether that's natural, artificial, sugar, or sugar alternative, so that you can use 60 to 80% less in any product and still hold the same taste. So a really good example of a first partnership would be we would help stevia by taking stevia that has a really natural sweetener opportunity within the market, but it's still a relatively small part of the overall market, and help them get into additional categories. An example is because our sweet proteins can get sweeter, right? So some of the limitations of the natural sweetener alternatives, they can't get quite as sweet to get into some of the big categories, like, let's say, beverages. And so we announced that last year. It's a large multi-year formulate and distribution, and they're working with all the big customers to extend their stevia solutions. So we're shipping to them. We also announced last year Mars as a big global project. We became part of their Unreasonable program and are working across 3 big parts of their business. And we have about a half a dozen, but I would say large global manufacturing partners that are CPGs where we are past manufacturing feasibility, beginning to plan launch programs. Quite a few happening in LATAM. One of the things, Michael, you and I talked about before, but I'll bring you current on, is we're proud of the fact that we have a nice regulatory platform in the U.S., but we're really following where we're going in the world, where our customer demand is the greatest. And we have very actively been expanding throughout Central and South America, largely due to customer demand. And you're going to see some fun announcements from us this year about some big partners that we think are moving some of the fastest in the world to think about how to reformulate foods and leverage a platform of sweet proteins to reduce the amount of small molecules that go into their sweetener systems.
So the stevia partnership, is that using one of your new, like an Oobli based sweetener, or would it be kind of reformulating stevia to even sweeter?
They will often sell, like, their primary goal, right, is like most of us in sweetening, you sell solutions more than any one tool within your toolkit. If you think of most packaged goods, right, packaged food and beverage very rarely has one sweetener, and it's usually a Swiss sweetener system. So in business, in the industry language, I think everyone talks about their solutions. So they have a lot of stevia solutions, different types of Reb A combinations with different flavors, different types of Reb M, different combinations of that. Now what they're doing is really saying, hey, we want to take a sweet protein base with stevia and sell it into particular applications. And they have a couple leading contenders. I can't share their news, but they're out in the market with it and very excited about what it can do. And we're really excited about the partnership. And we, in fact, why we adore our ingredient partners and are really excited about the work they're doing, that I'd like to think we're doing together with sweet proteins and with stevia. We're doing lots of that across the sweetener system. There's a lot of different types of sweeteners, from fibers and fillers to artificial as well as other natural sweeteners. And a lot of them can really be benefited by leveraging a base that's a protein sweetening base. We just offer a very different component to their approach to the system.
It's been a couple of years since we chatted, and the world changed a lot, obviously, with the emergence, or at least the rapid embrace of GLP-1s. I would imagine, like, you guys are thinking a lot about that, and maybe your customers are changing what they're doing. And this might be a good position for you to kind of offer up solutions that would have less of an impact on blood sugar, on microbiome, et cetera. So can you talk about how that's impacted your business?
It's a great question, and it's funny. I got involved with Oobli. I joined the founders a little over 4 years ago, and I thought sugar reduction or metabolic disease or those topics were already really, really important. I would say fast forward 4 years later, and they're more top of mind than they've ever been for the entire industry. One example of that is GLP-1s, and it has created an attention and an awareness around sort of how do you get at nutrient density on a smaller calorie base. So if you're going to eat less, how do you make more calories count? And one of the big tools in that toolbox is making sure you're not getting too many of your calories in sugars or sweets, right? In addition to the fact that you're then just sort of looking at the overall nutrient density. Sweet proteins show up really well in both those places. That's what I get really excited about. Where I would say we only sort of are net benefited by this world of paying attention to it. And what do I mean by that is we can actually operate to give you more sweetness. The sweetness may be replacing what you used to with less calories because you use very small amounts of sweet proteins in order to deliver that sweetness, but you do it on a nutritive basis. Our proteins are actually proteins. So if I put 100x in, it would be 100x a lot more calories, right? You just happen to use a small amount like you do in non-nutritive sweeteners. The difference is with those, you could put a lot more in and they still wouldn't be nutritive, right? We just use a small amount of a nutritive protein. The second is, and this is the kind of cool part, we're seeing more of this than I actually would have thought about a few years ago. And I'll use our Oobli chocolate bar as a good example. So when you think about a chocolate bar, and I'm just going to use our dark chocolate bar as an example. Our dark chocolate bar per serving is 90% less sugar than a typical dark chocolate bar, so across an industry average. And it's also per serving a third of your daily fiber. Well, why is that second part? Well, if I take out all that sugar and put in sweetness, sweet proteins can only replace sweetness. They don't replace bulk. So nobody's probably going to let me sell them then half the size chocolate bar, right, for the same amount. So I have to put something back in to give the structure. Well, the opportunity that presents is also very GLP-1 consistent, right? Because I take a bunch out of space and I can offer up a more nutrient-dense alternative within it. So now you have what was our goal with these chocolate bars is to show you what would be a protein sweetened chocolate bar taste like, where it's very different metabolically. But the upside is you then can fill with nutrient density and also have a fiber full or a more nutrient dense.
What's that fiber you're putting in to give it that bulk and structure?
We use chicory root in our chocolate bars, but you can use all sorts of fibers. So we haven't really met one we don't work with. And that's actually another really good example of where we're all working with other people in the sweetener system, right? Lots of the fiber players are really thinking about how they can be sort of a bigger role in this new world.
What about Maha? I would imagine that conversation and that has been another macro trend. It's obviously related and overlapping with GLP-1s, but I think it's separate and distinct. So how's that impacted your business?
It is. I think at the simplest level, Maha has been very much part of the enthusiasm around protein anything, right? And we are certainly the protein sweetening solution. So if you want to just talk protein first, there isn't really a different way to get at protein sweetening than sweet protein. So that is a net positive for us. And generally speaking, that has been, sort of run right at an intersection with the GLP-1 conversations. I would say the only part of the Maha movement that I would say is a risk factor, and it's not specifically to sweet proteins, but to anybody who's actually looking at more climate-friendly or productive ways to get at accessible food options that are healthier, is there's a lot of fear around this idea of processed and all the definition making around ultra high processed, which I think is an important conversation. I'm actually at the top of the list who should look at it, but it's a good example where just because something's fermented doesn't mean it's ultra high processed. We've been fermenting cheese for a long time and nobody would ever consider that high processed. So the nuance required around some of these new definitions at times gets a little bit oversimplified in this current movement. And there's some noise in that. And noise often comes from fear or lack of education on what are some of these tools. But that's one area where I would say we watch the headwinds. But generally speaking, the protein forward love is only a net positive for sweet proteins.
Yeah, in a way, Maha was born, I think, from out of influencer culture, and then it kind of ultimately bubbled its way up into like flipping the food pyramid. So it's an interesting time. But to your point about nuance, there's oftentimes not a lot of nuance in that space, and so that makes a lot of sense.
I think that's well said. I think when we're trying to solve, I always say, those of us that are working in for the food is health categories where, we know you're only going to win if you meet taste, but we're also, for the most of us want to really leverage everything we know about the plant universe. It's usually been sort of Mother Nature's usually been 2 steps ahead when it comes to health or better, right? But we're operating in a climate constrained world and a resource constrained world where population is outstripping some of that. And so access and cost really matters. When you're trying to look at all those complicated global systems and their intersection, nuance is required. There's a sophisticated set of complicated systems at play. And usually it takes more than a Twitter headline to understand what the trade-offs are. And so I think that's the area that I spend time worrying about, is that we oversimplify what is really important complexity that we're dealing with if we're going to get at some of these global system changes.
I've talked a lot to the leaders of Zevia, for example, and I always thought like Zevia would be a great partner for you guys, or maybe they could come out with like a protein-based sweetener. But are you talking to some of these big beverage companies? Because obviously Ingredion will be a provider to beverage companies, but are you talking directly to CPG brands, like maybe beverage brands where you could kind of swap out or create an entirely new line?
We are. I mean, honestly, I would say we have more interest to learn from our scientists and our technology platform directly with the CPG, but we also know some of the biggest ones, which is often the beverage players in the world. They're going to really do better relying on the supply chain of a large formulator and distributor who's already validated our supply chain. So we kind of think of our partners like an Ingredion as an and strategy for dedicated projects where somebody really wants to get under the hood with us and we're helping them develop a specific formula. We will invest the resources if there's a co-investment. Otherwise, we have big partners that will spend time with them, helping them with their formulations. And companies like an Ingredion are exactly the type that are usually working with the Zevia in the world.
I can't remember the early part of your journey, Ali. So I'd love to kind of revisit like how you got into food tech and found your way to Oobli. Tell our listeners a little bit about your journey to how you got here.
My journey is definitely not the most obvious one for most people because I've been in 5 industries. But the theme across my industries is that I've always been where technology is changing healthy living. And that was kind of my why. And I'm not sure when I was younger I knew that I kind of grew up with that bias. But I started out on the softest side of that in sports with classic Nike and CPG. But I quickly moved on to the climate side of what we were doing there in their corporate strategy initiatives and looking at some of their first recycled shoes to get at better sole and to actually get at their supply chain. And I loved it. After I went to graduate school, I went back out to the Silicon Valley, where then I started working with technology companies. I was in some of the first generation of even lifestyle wearables around specific health initiatives, even some allergy and asthma initiatives, but all where technology was changing healthy living. Then I ended up in healthcare tech, where I literally was a chief commercial officer sitting across basically all of our metabolic disease in this country and looking at the average person over 60 today being more than 6 prescriptions. And I became convinced that my why was to move farther up the food chain. I could help people with our data capabilities be prescription compliant, or I could start to unpack how do we give choices within the supply that help people not end up in that place and on so many prescriptions. And that led me to Oobli specifically. Really, I come at Oobli from a metabolic health and a desire to see the best of what technology can do to give us better healthy living. And while I'm proud of many things in this country, innovation being at the top of that list, I think our health care system operates more as a sick care system and isn't as strong as other parts in the world at looking at it as health and prevention. And I think food has to play a role in that. And so the last 4 to 5 years now, I'm committed to the food side of that to try to get at the prevention side.
Interesting. I don't know if I knew about your health background out of that side. I mean, that's an area that I've been spending a lot of time on because obviously it overlaps with wellness and food. But where do you see the future of tech-enabled, democratized wellness going? I mean, I just had a call yesterday with a kind of a neuroscience company doing like a brain health wearable, which I thought was maybe an interesting new potential category to the Auras and the smartwatches of the world. But I do think, and I've been playing a lot around with CGMs for the past year, which really kind of changes your whole perspective on what you're eating once you start seeing that data. But are you excited for that future? Are you seeing interesting things that can you help point you to 5 to 10 years from now, like what kind of the future that looks like?
I am really, I am an entrepreneur and I do believe in the enablement capability of technology. None of that means I think we can be casual about its distribution and access and its impact, right? And those two almost always go hand to hand. That's going to be just as true in health as it is in anything else. So what I get excited about, and then I'll tell you my challenge to it, especially coming out of healthcare tech, what I get excited about is whether I think the CGM stuff is almost sort of the tip of the iceberg. I'm not sure that we're that far off for where we're going to get up in the morning and most people get up and go to the bathroom first thing in the morning. You're probably going to have a little sensor on that and it's going to tell you something about how your system's reading that day. And you're going to think about your food for the day. And I think there's going to be tools like that surround the way our body interacts with what we're already doing all the time. It gives us readings and more information. And I think that's pretty exciting. I come a little bit more from the camp that I hope that doesn't mean we're just going to take pills and packets for everything. I'm hoping whole foods can give us the way into that and we find that better balance. Like I'm not really advocating that we just inject ourselves every week. If we can help people actually live to not have to do that, I think that's the bigger win, but it's more complicated. So what I worry about on that side of of sort of the equation is the economic equation for most. Most of these new tools today are for people with access and means. They're not evenly distributed throughout the system. And our healthcare system is sort of operating on the extremes, right, of lots of access with increasingly more cool options if you can afford layers on top of our system, or handling for the poor. But increasingly this middle, which is where we are going to have to win with health, is struggling to keep up on both sides. And that worries me in our current sort of healthcare meets healthy living.
It's funny because I was there as a market analyst back in when the iPhone came out. And at the time, the forecasters were predicting, 10 years from now, maybe 25% will have these super advanced smartphones. What they missed was like everyone wants one of these, and they're willing to basically put that ahead of their car payments and
Mhm.
everything else. Like it became like it's right up there with food almost in terms of a necessity. And I wonder sometimes maybe some sort of like tech powered health and wellness type of consumer tool set would be something that just becomes a must have for consumers. Maybe it's paired to other technology like an iPhone. My my worry is much like I've seen with the world of oil and gas is I think the incumbents oftentimes put up barriers to wider adoption and democratization of technologies. And I see that with EVs all the time. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So I just wonder if
That's right.
you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like there's lots of potential there for like a truly game-changing, democratized health and wellness consumer tool set. But I feel like the existing incumbents may put up barriers to get there.
I agree with all of that. And I think the real complexity, and I'm not an economist, but let's just talk about the economic theory that's really different here than in a lot of other categories, is we don't have normal market forces playing in health services in the US.
Right.
We say it's private, but it's not. The biggest part of the population is in a socialized system. There's layers of access within it. And what we know is none of it works in true market forces, and yet it's not socialized. Even if you think maybe market forces should have never applied to health care, we have the unique model of this insurance in the middle of it. And that insurance is a distribution model, which I think right now looks at risk on the middle class. It's, you know, it's working for those that can afford it and keep affording unrealistic cost increases every year, which have been going on far, far too long. And it's still going to have the coverage at the bottom of the market, but that's increasingly looking like sick and emergency care, not health care.
Yeah.
And so in the middle, how do we get at this with incentives? And what I don't have, I typically have confidence in most technology markets and as an entrepreneur in free market forces. You don't have that or proper social systems happening in
Yeah.
healthcare. So I don't know how to predict that, but I don't like what we see as the last 20-year
Tough.
trend.
There's a downside to influencer culture and what kind of Maha was born out of. But what I do like about it is people are trying to take their future into their own hands. And what I've seen with the biohacking world, it's super intriguing to me. A lot of bad information comes out of it. But at the heart of it, I think it's a good idea to try to put stuff in your future into your own hands. So you just need like good, honest players in that space and not malevolent forces, I guess. But
I agree. I think information's power and technology is information, right? Like I know it's a hard journey right now for doctors with everybody's, internet MD on everything. But the reality is information's power, right? And we, whether you had the internet or AI or not, you always had to be an advocate within those systems. So I do think there's a net good. It doesn't mean it's not always, neat and tidy as you get there. There's a lot of forces that we have to manage. And I think when it comes to things like particularly the role of food in that health equation, which, if you think about it, how did we ever get to a world where we thought zero on a label was the definition of a good food, right? Like that's so far off the very definition of what food is supposed to be about, which goes to show you it's the result of a lot of competing forces that ever get to that. The reality is, as you come back, what's really uniquely hard about that is very high volume, small purchases that make up the composite of what you end up eating is very different than making a $1,000 or $2,000 phone purchase decision every couple of years.
Yeah.
So really how we get it to work in this high velocity world where we have maximum choice all the time and we're making a lot of little decisions that add up to either better or worse, I think is a really unique part of what we're trying to do by bridging the divide of tech and nature and things like food. And it's hard. I always say I'm humbled by it on a regular basis. None of that means I'm not optimistic. I actually believe in the curve. I vote with my time, right? That's what I do with my time. But I think the complexities are unique, and it's going to take us journeying together with a certain amount of transparency and willingness to have an agreed-to compass.
Well, Ali, this has been fun. I didn't expect it to go into healthcare and all those other things, but your background made this a really rich conversation to kind of explore those areas. If people want to find out more about Oobli and what you guys are doing, where can they go?
Well, definitely check out Oobli.com. It's OOBLI.com. We always have latest information there, and we're making lots of announcements. I encourage people to sign up for our newsletter because we'll tell you when our protein sweetened products hitting the market, because the biggest protein sweetened products you're going to find are not from us. They're from everybody else that we are partnering with to make their products that much better. Encourage people to try them out. And I thank you for taking the time to chat, Michael. I enjoyed the conversation as well.
It's been fun.
Yeah, always good to talk to you.
Well, that was my conversation with Ali Wing of Oobli. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit more about what they're building with their sweet protein technology. We have a lot of exciting stuff happening this spring and summer. We'll have more news on that very, very soon. So stay tuned for that. But also stay tuned for another podcast we will be dropping tomorrow and also some more next week. So I hope to have you back, and we'll talk to y'all very, very soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.